The regular gospel text for the 23rd Sunday in Pentecost is not the one that's in your bulletin, but it's from Mark, the 10th chapter, beginning at the 46th verse. They came to Jericho, and he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho. Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. The week's news this week has been really a tragic affair because of the pipe bombs that have been made and the attack on a synagogue. It is really a chilling world that we look at today. But last week, remember, it was a little more optimistic. What was so exciting last week? It was the lottery. Everybody was talking about the lottery. It had gotten to the largest amount in the history of lottery in the United States, $1.6 billion. And that was nothing, had nothing to say about the few hundred millions that were involved in Powerball. It was something that was really minuscule in terms of the giant lottery. And so people were being interviewed. People were coming by the droves, standing in line for hours to buy lottery tickets, with the idea that maybe, somehow, even with their 300 million to 1 odds against them, they might win. When they were asked, "Why did you buy a lottery ticket?" they said, "Well, we can't win it if we don't buy a ticket." There's always that chance. And there were some that were saying, "I think it'll be me this week. I've prayed about it, and I think God will reward me with the lottery." Well, probably didn't. The question was then asked by the moderators on the morning shows. The people thought or were involved in the lottery. They said, "What would you do it if you won it? What would you do with $1.6 billion? Have you thought about that? What would you do with $1.6 billion? Would it change your life? Well, that depends upon what your life is like. There were some people, of course, that said they would just spend it on all those things that they always wanted, a lot of foolish things, and they concentrated on all those things that they thought would make life so good for them. Not necessarily beneficial for them, but just plain things they wanted. They were so outrageous in cost that they could never imagine it buying it without winning the lottery. The problem is that 1/3 of the people who win lotteries are broke again within 3 to 5 years. Isn't that interesting? Well, there were some that said they would do it on practical things, good things, to pay off the house mortgage. Maybe to make some contribution into the city, something for their parents, something for their children, pay for somebody's college education, all worthy projects. but concentrated primarily on themselves. And then occasionally there was somebody who would say something that would indicate that they had a benevolent use for the lottery. And they would talk about all the good things that they could do with it. And they would even go so far as to say, I don't need anything. I've got what I need. I'd be more than happy to give it all away. And so the conclusion was that winning the lottery and winning that amount of money wouldn't change people very much. It would simply make them more of what they are. It wouldn't change them, but it probably would make them more of what they are. Over the last 3 weeks, we had somebody coming to Jesus and asking him for something good, something really big. Maybe their idea of winning the lottery. And it is interesting as to how they responded. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the rich young ruler that came to Jesus and said, I have all the money I can possibly want. I obey all the rules, but something in my life is missing. I want purpose in life, and I want it now. Well, that didn't seem too bad, but it was pretty self-centered. And when he had to alter his way of life and share what he had, he gave up the idea of winning the lottery he was coming to Jesus to win. And then last week we had James and John coming to Jesus, and he's saying, what do you want? And James and John said, I want the right and left hand of you when you come into your kingdom. Not in the heavenly kingdom, the earthly kingdom. When you take on these Romans and get rid of them, and we become prominent again, then I'm on the right hand, James is on the left hand, and we have these special things which will give us all the power we want. Well, didn't sound like that unreasonable request, did it? They wanted to be close to Jesus, but it was all self-centered. In the gospel text today, there's a blind beggar. And he knows Jesus is coming. He's heard about him, and he calls out to him, Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me. And Jesus said, come here. Now, it's kind of funny that those around the beggar criticize him and say, why are you calling on Jesus? He's not here to monkey with blind beggars. And they were wrong, of course. He was there to deal with blind beggars, anybody that needed him. But when he asked him, what do you want? He said, I'd like to see again. I'd like my sight. And the really interesting thing was that when he was given his sight, there was a purpose, a holy purpose in it. Because the gospel says he got up, enjoyed what had happened, danced, and then followed Jesus to proclaim his word. They all asked for something, and if they would have received it, they would have always been the same, only a little more of what they had been before. Two totally concentrated on selfishness, and one on doing something profound for others. The question I have for you this morning is, Jesus is passing by, and you call to him, what are you going to ask for? That's the question this morning. What is it that would win the lottery for you? And I'm not talking about the one that's advertised nationwide. What would make your life more significant and make you more of what you are, the good part of you? And would you ask for that, or would you ask for something that really didn't matter. What really would you ask for if Jesus was passing by? And then the second question is, if he gave it to you, what would you do with it? In the Old Testament, the great kings came to God, and God said, "What do you want?" To Solomon, he said, "What do you want, Solomon? I'll give you anything that you ask for." And Solomon asked, "What I would like more than anything else is the wisdom to govern your people correctly and in a godly way." And he's rewarded with this request by God telling him, "Because you have chosen this above wealth and riches and all kinds of other things, I'm going to give you everything." And the kingdom under Solomon gets to be the greatest of all time that has ever been before or after. David came to God and he said, "What do you need from me?" He said, "I want power, the ability to be in control of this nation." And David is rewarded with that request. But then both of them go amiss. They have been given what they wanted, and they asked for it in a very, very benevolent way. But something happened along the way after they had received the gifts. Suddenly, they forgot who the gifts were from. And they started to take credit for their wisdom or their power themselves. And then, when they did, the kingdom fell to ruins. They took the gifts and they misused them. The important thing is when God gives you a gift, you receive it in humility and then use it for His glory. There is a story told about a visitor, a tourist that came to the home of Ludwig van Beethoven. When he was being shown through the house, he saw Beethoven's piano. And he said, "Oh, I would like to play Beethoven's piano. Can I do that?" And the guide said, "We usually don't do that because very often it's abused and people make a big show of it. There's only one person that we ever asked to play the piano. It was Paderewski. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with music history, Paderewski was one of the greatest pianists ever lived. And he went to the house of Beethoven, and they asked him, "Would you play some of Beethoven's works for us?" And Paderewski said, "I am not worthy to sit in the same seat that Ludwig van Beethoven sat in." See, the people that have a humility of their gifts become the strong messengers of that gift. And when you decide to take the gifts of Jesus and use them for His purpose, they grow and multiply. What are you doing with the gifts of Jesus? Are you looking at those gifts? I know that you have given gifts in your lifetime and come to the house of the person you've given them to and found out that they were in a closet or not being used or given away as a gift to somebody else. And you felt bad about it. And I think maybe in the heart of God, He looks at us who He's been so generous with and sees us taking those gifts He's given us and putting them in a closet or giving them away to somebody else to use. And He grieves. There's a parable of the talents in which Jesus talked about the gifts given to people. But then he says there's a time when God comes back. And he asks, what have you done with what I've given you? There is a certain accounting. I am here this Sunday morning because when I was working with my a fellow pastor in Hawaii, and I told her, I don't think that I'm going to be in full-time ministry anymore. And she looked at me and she said, you have to. And I said, why? And she said, because you've been given some gifts that are unique. You don't have all the gifts you need, but you've been given ones that are really critical. And I think it's a shame, a betrayal of God's grace if you don't use them correctly. Question is, what are you asking God for this morning? What gifts do you really want him to give you? And if you get those gifts, what are you going to do with them? Amen. Sermon hymn, the church's one foundation.